Okay, everyone, it's 4:20. We're going to get started. Thank you again so much for being here. My name is LaDawn Sullivan, and I'm the director of the Black Resilience in Colorado Fund, housed at the Denver Foundation. I'm going to just say a moment about the BRIC Fund, but I also just want to welcome you to the Black Giving Day Eve virtual celebration. And this has become something annual for us of taking time to elevate and celebrate the intentionality and the beauty of Black giving. So welcome today, and I'm really excited about the folks who will be kicking off our conversation, and then we'll all be gathering in conversation, and then we're going to do some celebrating, and it's just going to be a great time. And what a way to kick off a Friday afternoon, and hopefully a wonderful weekend for you all. So let me just speak just a moment about the Black Resilience in Colorado Fund. We are a fairly new fund. We're celebrating our first anniversary. And this fund was created intentionally to be a perpetual resource for the Black community, strengthening Black communities across Colorado through grants, through capacity building programs, through initiatives, but built by us, meaning Black folks, by us, for us, and led by us. And impacting us. So we're super excited about this work as we're moving into our second year, and we'll share at the end of this gathering, again, our website, which is www.bricfund.org, or you can capture us on social media, all the different activities and ways in which we are engaging in Colorado's Black community and beyond. Also, just as a friendly reminder, in case you didn't know, this is the 10th anniversary of Black Philanthropy Month. And you can change the slide daily. And this year's theme is tenacity, making equity real. So for those who do not know about Black Philanthropy Month, it's observed every year for the entire month of August. And it's an intentional celebration focused on Black philanthropy, Black giving. It was started by Dr. Jackie Bouvier Copeland and the Pan-African Women's Philanthropy Network in 2011 at the United Nations celebration and year and decade of people of African descent. Black Philanthropy Month is a concentrated time to annually inform, involve, inspire, and invest in Black philanthropic leadership, to strengthen Black giving, to support Black giving in all forms. And we often talk about the 5 T's of Black giving. And those are time, talent, treasure, testimony, and social ties. And utilizing all of those forms to benefit our communities, our organizations, and our lives. So this is really an exciting month full of activities, full of articles. If you even just Google search Black Philanthropy Month, you'll find just a plethora of wonderful events and ways to engage in the Black community through philanthropic activities. The reason why we call out, we will call out tomorrow, which is August 28th, is Black Giving Day, is because if you were to look at the timeline of and history of the Black community, we've had a lot of very recognizable events take place on tomorrow. So again, this event is on Black Giving Day Eve because tomorrow's Saturday. But if you look here at the timeline of what has taken place in the Black community, you see the significance of this date. And the first ever day of giving for Black-led and Black benefiting nonprofits launched in 2018, and the energy behind this has grown significantly to the point where this year there is a nonprofit organization that just recently named its ED, and they have launched a nationwide website, and that's Give 828, which the BRIC Fund and other Black-led and serving nonprofits in the Colorado region are participating in the website and in ways to connect folks and share more about the work that we're doing in our communities. Thank you, Dele. So today, I'm so excited to have two very special folks in our community who are going to really kick off this conversation about giving. And I've been very fortunate to get to know both of them in different respects, but certainly in alignment with what it means to be an African-American in the field of philanthropy and to be strategic in how giving can actually create the change that we wish to see. And so I'm excited to introduce Tina Walls and Jonathan Cunningham. And I'm going to share just a little bit about their bios before we go into, I would say, a robust conversation, because I know both of them. So I have no question that this is going to be an exciting conversation in itself. And then they're going to help kind of kick us off into a larger conversation in small groups. So first, I would like to introduce Tina Walls. I'm sorry, having a little technical difficulty here. Tina Walls' corporate career spanned over 30 years with Altria Group Incorporated, IBM, and Chemical Bank. Prior to Altria, Tina spent 6 years at the Colorado Legislative Council, where she staffed several Colorado General Assembly bipartisan leadership and House Public Policy committees. Tina is dedicated to supporting the arts as a platform for all Americans to share their unique stories, expanding access to the arts and elevating the stories of Americans of African descent. She currently serves on several boards and supports a number of arts institutions in the Denver area. She is a member of the board of directors of the Denver Center for Performing Arts, an organization that most of us are familiar with, that present Broadway and local theater company productions for about 1 million patrons every year. She also lends her expertise to, I would say, closer to the ground organizations like Cleo Parker Robinson Dance, which is international, but certainly beloved in our community, lending her expertise as a strategic advisory committee member. She's also worked in numerous capacities with the Denver Art Museum, with the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Denver, and has lent her expertise to the board and has served on the board of Save Venice, leading their US-based nonprofit dedicated to preserving the artistic heritage of Venice, Italy. As I said, she served in many capacities and many roles with several cultural institutions, including the Virginia Museum of the Arts and the Milwaukee Museum of Art and Museum of Contemporary Art. And I would say one of the beautiful things that I know about Tina is that she's a lifelong learner. She's always inquisitive, wanting to understand, especially things that are happening, within the philanthropic sector, particularly the work that I've been doing with the Black Resilience in Colorado Fund, as well as other efforts that you're going to hear a little bit more about, like Jonathan with the Repair Fund in Seattle. But also really keeping her ear to the ground and understanding the nuances of progress for the Black community. So I'm very excited to have Tina here with us. So thank you for being here, Tina. And then our other conversation starter is a fairly new friend, but a comrade in arms. And that's Jonathan Cunningham, who is the Senior Program Officer at the Seattle Foundation. His work drives investment in historically under-resourced communities through funder collaboratives, grant making, and fiscal sponsorships that aim to increase racial and economic equity in the region. His personal philanthropic interests and passions include the arts and culture. Oh, look at that, kindred spirits and didn't even know it. Economic opportunity, racial justice, and supporting Black-led organizations. He's also the principal architect for Repair, which is a new fund or a new initiative and funded at the Seattle Community Foundation, which stands for Racially Equitable Philanthropy Aimed in Initiating Reparations. It's a 5-year, $25 million commitment to Black-led organizations in the greater Seattle region. Jonathan brings a wealth of professional experience in developing and implementing and managing community initiatives for the last 15 years. He is a former Seattle Arts Commissioner with deep knowledge of navigating public, private, and municipal partnerships. And he currently serves on the board of The Residency, a youth-focused hip hop and social justice organization that he co-founded in 2015. He is a graduate of the University of Michigan and was a member of the Funders Network, placed his fellowship in 2019. And he's been working for the Seattle Foundation since 2017. So welcome to both of you. So excited to have you here. Oh man, you guys with these amazing bios, I don't know how I'm going to be able to keep up in this conversation. But I want to pose a question, and I will, to kind of kick us off here in this conversation about Black Philanthropy Month. And when we keep hearing this word, Black philanthropy. When you hear that word, what comes to mind? And Tina, maybe we'll start with you.
Good question. What comes to mind is all that I was taught to do as a young person to help support my community, give to my community, volunteer, do all of the things that made you present in where our community was and what its aspirations were or are at this point. But I see it as not just giving money, but it is about volunteering. It's about problem solving. It's about serving. It's about investing, because not everything is a return on investment. Not everything is a tax deduction. Sometimes you just give to help lift up, and you know that that's the reward, that you've lifted up and others have had an opportunity to learn and to experience.
That is so profound. I mean, I think often people think, you know, as you said, not getting something in return, but just doing it for the betterment of the good of humankind, which is, you know, what we always talk about is that kind of standard definition of what philanthropy is. Jonathan, what is your take on it? Where does it come from for you?
Yeah, I like the question. You know, it doesn't have to be so formal, right? And I think that sometimes, like philanthropy, like kind of a $5 word, it's longer and, you know, in syllables, and it might seem out of scope for some folks, or people might say just like, "Ooh, philanthropy, that sounds like something that high wealth individuals do." And the reality is, for me, it really relates to like the values that I was raised with, things that I saw my grandparents do and my grandmother do, and around the neighborhood and in their church. You know, there's so much giving that happens in the church, and then just that philanthropic spirit, giving back. You know, we're doing a series. I'm so glad to be a part of a Black Philanthropy Month conversation virtually in Denver. We are also carrying the torch forward, and we're hosting a 4-part series in Seattle. And for our 4-part series, one of the first ones was about like what is answering a similar question, and sort of looking at the church, sort of looking at just giving it at a smaller level, but those twos and fews really matter. You know, and they can really add up. And Black folks have been participating in philanthropy for a long time. They likely just wouldn't have called it that. You know, sometimes folks call it just like doing the Lord's work. And there's a variety of terms that feel culturally relevant to how our people look at philanthropy and giving back, and just at the end of the day, just doing right by people. And then, you know, sort of thinking of it today, at least in my current role, you know, I think there is a tremendous weight and responsibility for those of us who, you know, are racially identify as Black, African American. We've gotten into these positions typically intentionally. Like I intentionally chose to be here and have taken a role, you know, somewhat inside the belly of the beast, being inside of an institution. You know, sometimes that's where the institutional racism is made. And to be a change agent. To be sincere about that and to be a change agent. And then by being this close to such a large amount of resources, I absolutely feel it is my duty to be able to move those resources to where there's the most need, which is typically within marginalized, systemically excluded communities, which top of the list is always Black and Indigenous communities and organizations. So, you know, I'm always just trying to move those resources however I can. And in that regard, it's really about a returning of resources. And the spirit of philanthropy is supposed to be about giving. And we think about giving to where there's the most need. And it is undeniable in this country throughout our history. And if you look at just, you know, test scores, racial wealth gap, I mean, it's not the past, it's the present. There continues to be tremendous need within the Black community. And so I think it's absolutely a necessity for all foundations to be increasing their output to Black-led organizations and to the Black community.
Let me just say, you both are already, I have like 70,000 questions, and I see some energy in the chat, which is amazing. But I also, you know, immediately when we start having this conversation, this passion is obviously bubbling up. Talk to us about, like, what is your passion in relationship to how you give and how you are participating philanthropically in your community, and why and how has it fueled your giving? And I'll let either of you start. Maybe Tina, I'll start with you.
Okay, all right. Well, it's just to build on something that Jonathan had said about the church. You know, when I was a little kid, we had to give our pennies, right? We had to tithe. Whether it was a penny that your mom handed over, your dad handed over, or a nickel or whatever, or you were helping, you know, young kids somewhere else who were not as fortunate as you. And I look at philanthropy as sort of tithing for humanity. It really is about trying to lift everybody up, okay, in some way. So when it comes to my passion, it happens to be the arts. And I like that space. And I think that space is important because I believe that it helps to share our stories with others who do not necessarily look like us or have had the same experience as many of those who look like us have had, okay? And so for me, the arts is sort of also a safe space for all kinds of people to come together and to learn and to share and perhaps actually help us to sort of knit together a stronger social fabric for our communities. And so for me, that's why I'm so passionate about the arts, because it's an outlet. There's no real, you know, definition of what is perfect art. People can bring themselves to it and bring their stories with them, and people get to learn. So that's one of the areas of what I'm passionate about. And again, sort of going back to how you support it, yes, you can support it with dollars, but you can also support it in ways by serving and making sure that you're at the table where the decisions are made as to what kind of programs are going to be offered, as to how money is going to support organizations in your community. So if you can serve on a board, you can serve on a commission, you can serve on a committee, you can serve on a grant-making committee. Those are ways that we can lift up our organizations, our unique gifts, whether, you know, et cetera. And so I think that's a really important way to sort of define how you can give. And then there are many other ways as well that we can get into.
Jonathan, I'm just gonna say, would you like to add something to Tina's response? Because obviously,
I mean, that's not easy. That's not
I
easy.
know.
She hit it. She hit it. I mean, you know, and I think that tithing to humanity is that's so real. That's so honest. And I wish that people could see it that way, and that it's not as if we're trying to force their hand or do a bunch of guilt shaming and shaming people into giving. Like, much has been given to all of us. But yeah, I can relate to sitting like, you better put something in the basket. You have, the grandma and them, they made sure,
Right.
even if it came from them, like it was the teaching the spirit of giving, and that's really important. And all people should find ways to give back. However, if you are of means, because what we have truly is a blessing, and it also can be taken away. So I think for me, I'll come back to the position that I've taken working inside of a foundation that's very intentional. I used to run a variety of different nonprofit grant funded programs. So I certainly know what it's like to have to go to a foundation and feel and do honestly what feels sometimes like begging white folks for money, to be supporting communities of color and supporting youth of color and supporting communities that really, really matter. But perhaps to them, it's just, you're just there 10 to 10:30 and it doesn't mean as much to them. And it's just not the best feeling. And I've had some positive interactions with foundations prior to joining a foundation when I was in the nonprofit space. But sometimes it's a little, it can go either way. And I thought, well, you know what, honestly, in all honesty, like, what if when folks who are doing this really important, necessary community work, when they come into the foundation, they get me. And I'm somebody who's willing to listen and to go out and learn and be able to move resources wherever applicable. So I kind of feel a little bit like I've chosen this job very intentionally, and I am just always just trying to get dollars to where they need to go and to folks who are doing the work. I'm passionate about not making people jump through hoops. I mean, I feel like I have the easy job. Like if you're sharing your proposal with me, and your proposal is all about how you're, being able to effectively decrease gun violence in the Black community, help get kids to school, doing, after school programs, and that's the hard work. The hard work is to do the work. It is easy to review a proposal and say that this is it. I like this. My job is far easier than the ones who are in the community, really, really, truly on the front lines, and going in households when parents have had their kids killed by gun violence and having to cover funerals and all the things that some of our Black-led organizations, like, they're just carrying such a heavy weight right now. And I feel like it's truly is my honor and duty to be able to review applications as they come in, or sometimes not have an application, just be able to have relationships, but the main thing is, let's give folks resources that they need when we can, and at the level that we can. And then also the other important thing is, like, part of the reason why I'm here, even though I'm obviously based in Seattle, is the funders. We need to be in communication with one another when we have initiatives about funding Black-led organizations. We need to be there. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Love being able to talk to you, LaDawn, talk to folks at East Bay Community Foundation, talk to folks all across the country, in the Bay Area, et cetera, and learn from best practices. But it's also really important to be opening up doors. Like I say, if for one of our grant programs, if we're funding an organization at X level and getting them resources that they need, but the work that they're doing is so much larger, sometimes I have to humbly say, like, we don't have it all, but I really want to introduce you to so and so over here. Right. Let me send the introductory email. Or I might, previously we've done with our former CEO, he had really strong connections nationwide. And for those whose work was worth it, he could just send Darren an email over at Ford Foundation and say, hey, I really want to introduce you to someone. And I think those things go just as far as well. Sometimes it feels as if as a program officer or someone who works at a foundation, it's as if the request lives and dies with us. But the reality is, even when we say yes to something, you're getting them a portion of what they need, but they need more. And so how can we just continue to open up doors and really have a giving spirit? And sometimes giving is also to be able to, like, help organizations grow their relationships. We did a really good study, obviously paid a consulting firm and worked with one of our Black-led nonprofits, and we released a report called The Case for Supporting Black-led Organizations in King County, which is where Seattle is. And what that report looked at is, like, what are the annual budget sizes of Black-led organizations? What are the annual operating reserves? Tina, I'm sure you can appreciate this with corporate experience. Sometimes it looks good. Let's go under the hood, right? What type of cash reserves do we have? Operating expenses, annual operating budget. What are the impediments to being able to get funding? What are your funding sources? And some of the feedback we heard is that quite often some of the Black-led organizations, they're hearing about things too late. Also, and sometimes that often translates to they just don't have capacity. They don't have someone in development. They don't have a grant writer. If they're hearing about stuff a little bit later. And sometimes they also name that they don't have connections with other funders. And so for me, those are things that we can do. One, we have to shift how we do outreach around things. Maybe we need to put an ad in the Black newspaper in addition to a social media post. Everybody ain't on social media. Put something out in the newsletter. Everybody ain't subscribed to our newsletter. You have to find innovative ways to get the word out, have folks be ambassadors. And then that part about opening up the connections and the Rolodex and all that, that is essential. That's been done for me. And I pay it forward to others whenever I can.
So Jonathan, well, you and Tina actually brought up something interesting, and I would also say I kind of couple it with what I know about both of you. Is there is something to be said, like Tina serves on boards, you work at the Seattle Community Foundation, you're both in relationship out in the community. Talk a little bit about, I mean, and kind of digging into what you're talking about. In some ways, you're talking about those 5 T's, but you're talking more specifically about how you lead with them. You lead with relationship, you lead with sharing information and kind of strengthening the web of communication within the Black community, where it's a safe space to say, I don't know. It's a safe space to say, our organization literally has 2 volunteers, but we're serving the community, particularly now, and with COVID and escalated racial injustice. We have folks that have never left the front line. So talk a little bit about how you view your leadership at decision-making tables. Both of you are at decision-making tables, and how that shows up in a way that you feel is, I guess, staying true to your roots within the Black community and the progress of Black folks.
Jonathan, you should go first.
That's funny. Okay. Well, there's a couple things. One, I saw the comment, and I'll pull up the report and I'll put it in the chat so hopefully others can see it. Even though it's based in King County, it's applicable nationwide. We're talking Denver and Seattle are actually similar, probably have a similar size Black community, probably have Black-led organizations that do amazing work that are incredibly underfunded, that are working off pennies on the dollar. So I think there's a lot in that report that's probably applicable. So I'll share that in the chat. But if I'm understanding the question correctly around like the leadership aspect and how we bring folks along, one, I think it's really important to always, like, we get away from it being as staff making decisions on things, grant decisions alone. Like, you always have to have community voices involved. And so one of the things that really attracted me to what you're doing with BRIC is that there's a community review panel. You have folks that you've been working with, you have other folks that are change agents. And I think that's a part of the process. And then sometimes as the more the foundation leans on that, they have to honor that. So I'll share that for our version of that is our Black-led organization cohort. So around 2 years ago, we started before Repair launched, started thinking through what might it look like to have a larger initiative supporting the Black community, but one that really needs to be built with the Black community, certainly not for the Black community, because they're not going for that. Nothing for us without us. We want to be involved, because it's like, first, who are you? What's, we all the things, so you got to involve people. And so we assembled a group of 10 Black-led organizations that we meet with on a regular basis. And those leaders and their input have been invaluable. We call that group the Block. And so the more that Seattle Foundation is often lifting up and cheering about the Block and their input, it's just like, that has to be real. They have to continue to have space to advise on things. And of course, we always pay people for their time. That feels incredibly important. With our grant review panels, one of the things that's a part of Repair, you'll hear me reference that a lot. One, just pitching that to our leadership, that was no small effort. It's no small thing to get a 75-year-old, realistically white dominant community foundation to say yes to an initiative with reparations in the name, and they said yes. And one of the things that's a part of that is to ensure that we always have Black and Native individuals on our grant review panels, to ensure like that representation matters. That's a part of it. How are we making space for Black community members to be talking to our leadership? Whenever I co-facilitate our block meetings, our Black-led organization cohort meetings, sometimes we'll have leadership attend. One important caveat, it's also really important to have the boldness to just have like Black spaces and to have all Black spaces. Like that's still important too, where no code switching is allowed. When the Block first launched, I said, okay, we're all Black organizations, Black staff is facilitating the meetings. And I said, we'll continue to build some relationships. And then eventually, we might have our CEO attend, or we might have someone else attend. And there was a pause. And then someone said, can we just keep it all Black? Can we just keep it all Black? And I said, that's fine. But we've also been hiring more Black folks into leadership. And so I can rotate in our chief engagement officer, who's an African-American woman who just joined. I can rotate in our director of marketing and our events planner and some of our more senior leadership, because we've been bringing on more Black leadership and staff. So that works out. And sometimes myself and Cedric Davis, who I believe is on this call in the audience somewhere, sometimes we have to be the bridge, but that's okay. They were very clear. They wanted an all Black space, no code switching, but that's how we get the best information. That stuff is informing our grant programs. It's informing our giving strategies. Once folks have to code switch and put on a little, it's watered down a little bit. And they were pretty clear, like, you do that's your dead 9 to 5, not mine. In this space, we just want to keep it all Black, and then you can translate. And I'm like, I can do that. That's fine. So I think those are some of the smaller ways. Those are some of the smaller ways where it's happening.
Awesome. Tina, what about your vantage point from sitting on board?
A board member? Yeah. I have owned a term that has shocked some of my colleagues on my boards. I say to them, I have a PhD on white people. I want white people to get a GED on Black people. And I have said that in board meetings, okay? And I've said that to try to get them to get them upset, some just opening their ears, some people react to it in very different ways, but it's an important role that I have to not only focus on the whole of the organization, but the things that matter to my community. And you have to own it. You just have to own it. That's number one. Number two, we can actually help organizations by helping them to do a gap analysis around the topic of Black Lives Matter. I ask the simple question, love the statement, but what are we doing to support the statement? What are we doing to reflect our community by way of the board, the staff, the programming, the education programming, and the donors? And if we're not present in all of those spaces, they need to close the gap. Right. So that's another part of the conversation that as a board member I can have. And sometimes it's in the full room. Sometimes it's with the leadership where we're really trying to talk through how do we close the gap.
Right,
okay?
Right.
This is not about shaming, getting back to that wonderful word that Jonathan brought up. There's no need to shame. Just tell the truth, tell your truth, and then let them react to your truth in these rooms. I would say the other thing that I think is really important as a board member is to be very clear about what I'm going to support with the dollars that they expect me to give and or get. And I tend to be very clear that I am happy to support those things that lift up the African-American community or the African diaspora. And then finally, I would say that the other role that I think is really critical is that connection. And Jonathan's talked about it, LaDawn, you've talked about it. It's that two-way introduction where you know that there's a potential for a connection that can be powerful. Make it happen. And I guess one final comment, and that is always ask questions. Always ask, because the worst thing that you can be told maybe is no. But generally speaking, if you ask, people are willing to try to understand why you're asking and what they can do to help close the gaps that I'm talking about.
Think you both so much. I mean, you guys have dropped lots of nuggets. I'm so glad we're recording this part because I'm going to have to listen to it again to pick up all those, put all those nuggets in my little pail. I have a final question before we go into our smaller groups and where everyone's going to get a chance to chat. But in thinking about and focusing on the Black community today, if you could share just one salient thing or one salient idea of where philanthropy is most needed to fuel the progress of the Black community. So I'm gonna let whoever wants to go first, go first.
I can start. I'll start
Okay.
with it. They're really somewhat really two critical pathways. One is, from my perspective, one is that we can't just assume that everything is about some nonprofit organization. For us to create generational wealth, we have to go down multiple tracks, including supporting commercial ventures and people getting their first home and all kinds of things. So that's why I call it more about tithing to humanity versus that philanthropic word, because I think it somewhat narrows how people look at things. And so that's one area that I think deserves some exploration, more exploration, because my long-term goal is all about creating generational wealth for my family and for other families. That's how we achieve. That's how we go from surviving to thriving. Okay, so that's one. And then the second is really a plea to everybody, and that is to serve. And serve in spaces where your voices, our voices are very important anyway, but serve in spaces where you think that what they're trying to accomplish is something of great interest to you, you have some passion for, you think they're headed generally in the right direction, and that there are some allies that are in those spaces. If you don't have those three things, it can be a little challenging, a little frustrating. And so one of the things I've been sharing with folks that I've been mentoring and connecting with organizations is ask questions like, who else is Black on the board? Okay, okay, if you don't have somebody now, who served before? Because I want to talk to them. I want to have a sense of what I'm walking into. And quite honestly, I now have a rule. I don't join a board if I'm going to be the only one. Forget it. I don't have time to educate. I'm too old to have to go through the education process. Okay. So, and I tell them that, yes, I just don't have the time, but I'm happy to help them if they are willing to bring together two members so that people aren't alone. We cannot be alone in serving in these environments. It's just not healthy for any of us. So that's sort of the other thing, but it's so important that we're at the table. So keep that in mind. I'm happy to, this is a much bigger conversation, but it's a conversation that I think we have to have, because if we're not at the table, we do not have access. And back to Jonathan's comment, if we're not communicating on all of those streams, social media, Black radio, TV, newspapers, etc., we don't know in time to access funding. And one other thing I would ask, LaDon, please share the statistics on how much our community actually receives of philanthropic dollars, because I know it's low.
Yes, it's very low. It's Jonathan, you can help me with this, because we know, I think nationally isn't, well, I was going to say, we also have some other philanthropic leaders on here that may check us. So I'm actually going to ask someone to put it in the chat. For Black women and girls, it's very small. I believe Lauren Castile's on here. I believe it's 5% or lower. So I would imagine if we were looking at the Black community holistically, those numbers are still well below 10%.
Way low.
Yeah, way low,
Yes.
very
Way
low.
much lower than that.
And
Yeah.
and lower for our Native American brothers and sisters too.
Right.
I don't want to leave them out the conversation as well. Both communities have sometimes quite often are pitted against one another, but the philanthropic investment in both Black-led organizations and Native-led organizations is criminally low. And I mean that thinking about payouts, thinking about how much wealth there is. So all of it needs to come up. LaDawn, and I know we're gonna go to breakout spaces soon. I was gonna share. It's
Yes.
hard to add when you say where is philanthropic attention most needed. That's hard.
I gotta narrow you. I gotta narrow you. We'll be here all night.
Well, I'll share. I think even with the narrowing, it requires a multi-pronged approach because the focus on closing the racial wealth gap is critical. Investment in civic engagement, it feels incredibly important because you can see, like, again, I think we shared this before we came on, that sometimes the best defense is a strong offense. And without making it a political conversation, the conservatives, they're very aggressive in aiming to take away voting rights. They're incredibly aggressive with that. And I think that we need to spend more philanthropic resources needs to go towards civil protections and civic engagement. And how can we get politically woke, but more so than woke. Woke's not the right word. Just folks who are just standing in their truth and doing the right thing who can represent us. We need more Black leaders stepping into those. Like we got to be in multiple places. Sometimes it's philanthropy, sometimes it's in city government, sometimes it's a bureaucrat here or there. But we need our elected officials to step up. And we also need when vote, because voting matters. Voting impacts who's in office, and it also can impact who might sentence you or not sentence you. The time to have when you have to go sit down. Your voting impacts who the judges are, who the sheriff is, who all these things, and they are absolutely trying to eradicate Black folks having the right to vote. I mean, and they're just bold about it. And we just can't sit back and stand pat, right? So I do think that there needs to be philanthropic dollars going towards civic engagement. And we talked about the economic opportunity is huge. Closing that racial wealth gap is so critical. Our criminal justice system in this country is a mess, and it perpetuates so much. So many young folks grow up without their loved ones because they're incarcerated and they end up in foster care. And people who often go to foster care have a significantly higher rate of going to prison. It's a very much a rinse, wash, and repeat. We need to have some philanthropic resources going to the criminal legal system because there certainly is injustice. So it really requires a multi-pronged approach, but the time is now. And the drip feeding towards solutions doesn't work. We need a much larger infusion of resources going to all of these areas and more.
Well, what a way to kick off the conversation for all of our participants in this virtual gathering this evening. Tina and Jonathan, I can't even tell you how, I am just, my mind is blown and my mind is spinning in space because there's so many great things that you brought up, so many conversations. I think if we could, we would be in the Zoom space for the rest of the evening, diving into all the beautiful things that you brought to the surface, and things that make us say, and think through how we're going to actually address this, address the issues that belabor the liberation of Black folks, quite frankly. But now's our chance to transition. So I want to thank you both so much for kicking off this conversation so richly. To all the folks who are on the Zoom with us, now's your time to engage in dialogue in small groups. And so our Zoom maestro, Dele, has posted these questions. They'll also be posted in the small breakout rooms. We're going to ask everyone to stay on and stay with us as we move into some smaller spaces and engage in some dialogue for the next 15 minutes or so on these three questions. We're going to ask that your small groups self-facilitate, so whatever that means for you. And we will ask for a couple of folks to share things that just are so on fire for them as they come out of the small groups. We'll have a little space for folks to share that. So, Dele, I'm going to leave it to you. And I know several people in the Zoom also really appreciate Jonathan and Tina's amazing conversation. So here we go. Welcome back, everyone. I see lots of smiles and I don't see anybody crying. So those conversations must have been pretty good. We have time for a couple of if folks want to share something that happened in their conversation that they'd like to share with everyone here in the gathering. So does anybody want to share what they heard or something that was profound to them? Don't be shy. I will call.
I'll go ahead and go first. So in our little meeting, we talked about, and the young lady who was speaking, she would have to kind of tell you the story, but we all need to cut the orange and share our orange. And basically, this is the first time that I'm coming into, a speaking of this sort. So I don't belong to any type of an organization. I want to get into one. And it's just basically about, getting what we need to get and get done for the Black community, for our brothers and sisters. So I'll let the other young lady kind of share the story about the orange, but we all need to kind of, cut our orange and share and educate and help and make all of us prosperous.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Next.
Is there someone else who would like to share a highlight from their group, from conversation? Lauren, I see you took mute off.
No, I did that only because the orange story, June in our group talked about her family that is of refugee and immigrant background. And of course, that is foremost on many people's minds today in some capacity. And it reminded me of a story of a book of a young woman from Rwanda who walked across 7 countries over 7 years. And she wrote this book, and what fueled her was remembering her mother saying that if you have an orange, you have to keep cutting the orange so everybody can have a taste. And, somehow the orange kept getting bigger and bigger, even as she kept cutting it. So June's experience inspired that memory of a book that I had read.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And rings so true to the DNA of who we are as Black people, because we always share even out of our need with others, so that everybody at least has an opportunity, a similar opportunity. So that's really beautiful. We have time for one more highlight from one of the groups. So if there's another who would like to share, please do so.
So in our group, we naturally, once church was given as an example, we naturally went back to that. And I think many other groups did as well. But I pointed out a time where in our neighborhood in Chicago, without having very many resources, there were a couple of uncles, one in specific that I remember, that would come to visit us, and they would always bring gifts. They would always either come with ice cream or from the soft serve or snacks or give us money for our pocket. But whenever we saw them, we knew that they were coming to sow into our neighborhood. And there was about 10 of us, that were around there, 10 young kids, and we would all flock around them for the gifts. And then as I grew older, I wanted them showing up to be the gift and not what they brought to be the gift. But that is where I got my giving spirit, because I remember how good it felt to be on a hot summer day and not have, and then they show up and then we had. And it just felt really good. And I like to show that and to show others how good it feels to receive when you don't have, and to be sold into without there being any expectations of any return. So that was like the first example of Black philanthropy that I was, was able to notice coming up as a young kid. And I know that was like one of the influences that makes me a giver today, is being able to see how easy it was for them to come and share their gains with us.
Thanks, Johnny. That's I see lots of heads nodding and lots of smiling. So I think that certainly resonates with a lot of folks in our gathering. Tina, did you have something you wanted to share before I go into kind of getting us close to the end? Because we're just have a few minutes here.
Yes, actually, I do. One thing that I didn't have a chance to share was the need to be flexible. And though I am a big arts supporter, COVID clearly was a big lesson in what people needed immediately, the basics. And it was important to work with others. I found it very important to work with others who knew that space to help support organizations providing food relief, healthcare, and other services that the government hadn't quite caught up to delivering. And our community was really hurting. And it doesn't mean that I then turned my back on the arts, but it just meant I shifted my focus and philanthropy at the time until that space strengthened, where I could go back to where I know and I'm passionate about. So one thing that I think is really important is really understanding where we are as a community. We rely on folks like you, LaDawn, and BRIC, that is really had a terrific inaugural year to really help us to focus where we need to focus and to partner with each other to help move things forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. And that's a beautiful segue into what I would say is close to us wrapping up tonight's event, tonight's gathering. And so I just want to thank everyone for participating in small group conversations. There's a unique energy. It's kind of like, you know, sitting around in that circle. Well, at least when I was a little kid, you would sit and listen to the elders talk about just the richness of our community and the stories that spoke to really what has informed how we have all grown up, and particularly in giving and how it shows up for us and how we lean into that as we grow older. And Tina, I was just gonna say, what a beautiful segue into BRIC, into the BRIC Fund. As you all know, we've been here for a year. We've had a great first year, exceeding our initial amount that we wanted to raise, but the work continues. We want BRIC to be a perpetual resource for Colorado's Black community. And as in what I think is going to be a growing tradition, during the month of Black Philanthropy Month, during August, we have had unique partners who have stepped up to actually offer to match any dollars given. I don't care if it's 50 cents or much more than 50 cents. They will match everything from individual donors, dollar for dollar, up to a total of $50,000. And we still have a little room and a few more days for the end of this month for BRIC to continue to support our Black nonprofit organizations, to continue to support Black leadership, on all levels, whether it be those that serve on boards, those that are running Black-led and serving nonprofit organizations, or those that are mobilizing on the ground out in community, organizing for community change, for policy and practice to be more equitable, particularly when it comes to the Black community. And BRIC, again, is 1 year old. We haven't even reached the toddler stage, and we envision big things coming up. We're not quite sure what they will be, but they will be community-led and community-informed. And I do see a couple of my BRIC advisory committee members on this call. I want to thank them for their leadership and vision and for their support of these efforts. And so for those who will, until the end of the month, if you would like to exercise your Black philanthropy, your treasure, we put the link in the chat. If you'd like to support BRIC, and/or I will also put my contact information in the chat as well if you are looking for ways to engage. with nonprofits, with BRIC. We certainly have a lot of connections, particularly in the Black community, but even beyond, and want to help people meet their passions and be able to invest those 5 T's of time, talent, treasure, testimony, and social ties. So I'm just super excited everyone has been here with us. We would not be able to end this program without an official toast as we come to a close of Black Philanthropy Month. We just have a few more days, but maybe we can toast each evening until the end, until the 31st. But I just would like to say this toast is done in honor of each and every one of who has participated in this gathering, but I would even say more so, that has lived out what is historically and culturally a part of who we are, particularly as Black people, in giving our 5 T's, and as Tina said, tithing for humanity, tithing into humanity, for the progress of our people, of our community, of our organizations, and of our lives. So this is, I just have water, but it'll work. So if everybody wants to raise whatever they have, and we will toast to another, to the 10th anniversary of Black Philanthropy Month, to the 3rd anniversary of Black Giving Day, and to the progress of the Black community worldwide. Toast to everyone, toast to you all. Thanks so much for being here. Just so you know, this recording will be posted on the BRIC website, which is bricfund.org. If you are looking for this in a couple of days, we'll also post the resources that were in the chat. Thank you to all who provided resources, including some of our partner organizations. There'll be some links to the Women's Foundation of Colorado, Women and Girls of Color Fund, I see, and the Seattle Foundation's Repair Fund. We want to make sure that we're creating access, not just for BRIC, but also for all the efforts that are pushing for the intentional push for the success and progress of our community. So thanks so much for spending your evening with us. Enjoy your libations. And we'll be together again at, I'm sure we will have another opportunity to gather virtually or maybe in person by 2022. So thank you so much everyone for joining us this evening. Thanks again to Jonathan and Tina, and we bid you good night.